Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ignorant Intellectual on Media. Today, I thought we'd do our fifth episode of Book versus Movie, and today's movie and book is the movie Dances with Wolves, starring Kevin Costner, directed by Kevin Costner, came out in 1990, and Dances with Wolves, the book, written by Michael Blake, and it was published in 1988. Now, Blake, when he wrote the book, Um, it is my understanding that he wrote it in order for it to become a movie. He wanted it to be a movie, so he wrote it like he wanted it to be a movie. So um, his wish came true because 2 years later they made a movie of it, and actually he wrote the screenplay for it. So he's the one that wrote the screenplay. Costner is the one that starred, directed, and produced the film, and it won. It was nominated for 12 Oscars, and I think it won five or seven. But it won Best Picture. It won Best Director for Costner, and it won Best Cinematography. And if you've watched the film, you know why it would win Best Cinematography. It's a gorgeous film, and um, Best Director, yeah, it's a great film. Anyway, so what is the film about? The film is basically about the lead character is name. He's a lieutenant in the Union Army. All right, in the United States, and he's at a battle in Tennessee. I think it's in Tennessee, anyways, and he gets his foot shot or injured in some way, and basically they're going to cut off his foot. And so instead of him being footless, he decides that he would rather die in the line of commit suicide in the line of duty rather than lose his foot. So what he does is, in the movie, anyways, he puts his boot back on. He goes, grabs a horse from the stable of horses, and they're at a battle in this field where one side is the Union Army and the other side, 100 yards away or however many yards away, is the Confederate Army, and they're at a standstill, right? So he grabs a horse and he's deciding he's going to commit suicide. And what he does is in the field or the plain between the two armies, he rushes out on his horse and goes right by the army, and they're all pulling out their muskets and shooting him, trying to shoot him, right? And they keep missing, and so he goes all the way across, and nobody hits him. So he decides to go all the way across back the other way because he's not getting killed, right? So on the way back, he raises up his arms like this to be shot, and basically, uh, you know, the Union Army takes the distraction as as a invitation to attack, and they run across the field and they basically rout the Confederate Army. And so he's now fallen off his horse, and the general who was watching the skirmish or whatever comes down and congratulates him, tell him he's a brave soldier. And so Dunbar says, "Don't take off my foot," and so they don't take off his foot. He calls the general surgeon, and they fix his foot. And then they give him a request, and his request is to go out um, onto the furthest. He wants to go out into the frontier before it disappears or whatever, right? So he gets transferred, and he ends up going out to the furthest fort in the Union Army, which is, I think it's called Fort Sedgwick, if I remember correctly. All right, I didn't write it down. So so he's out there, and then um, he is there, and there's nobody there. And in the book, the and the movie do a little bit differently, but basically in the movie, he gets stranded there and nobody knows he's there because the person that transported him there by coach or whatever, which brought all the supplies along with it, he gets killed by the Pawnee on his traveling back to the fort from the fort. So from Fort Sedgwick to Fort wherever it was, right? So he gets killed on the way back, and the the commander of that fort that sent Dunbar to Fort Sedgwick uh, kills himself, shoots himself in the head, and now nobody knows that Dunbar is um, at that fort. So he's there by himself, and nobody knows that he's there. All right. So the movie shows it in one way and the book shows it in a little bit different way, but basically it's almost the same way. And so he's stranded out there. He doesn't know he's stranded, so he's keeping the fort. But eventually, what happens is he comes into contact with some native people. All right, and basically in the film, the native people are the Lakota people, part of the Sioux Nation. All right, but um, in the book, they're I think they were Comanche, if I remember correctly. Yeah, they were Comanche. All right, so there's a difference between the book and the movie. In the movie, they were Sioux. In the book, they were Comanche. All right, but basically everything else about that story kind of goes along a similar path where he slowly gets assimilated into Sioux culture, and he ends up getting the name of Dances with Wolves because the medicine man for the tribe, who's named Kicking Bird, sees him playing with Two Socks, which was a lone wolf that he ended up befriending while he was at Fort Sedgwick, and called him Two Socks because he had like these white paws, right? So anyway, so it basically goes to him assimilating in with the Sioux tribe, meeting a woman in the Sioux tribe who was also white, who was um, adopted by the Sioux people after uh, the Pawnee attacked their village or whatever, or their settlement, and killed everybody in it. And the only person left was her. And anyway, so her name was Stands with a Fist. All right, and they get involved and they get married, and then he becomes a full-fledged member of the Sioux tribe, and he gives up his, quote unquote whiteness, I guess you would call it, or his Union Army ties or whatever, right? So, but the army eventually does come, and that's by almost at the end of the movie, and then it, the movie and the book kind of ends with um, him leaving the tribe to go speak to whoever would speak to him um, about how they're misrepresenting that Indians are all just savages and you know uh, should be killed or whatever, right? So that's basically the plot of the film. And like I said, it won a bunch of Oscars deservedly because the film is a great film. The cinematography in it is gorgeous. The planes that they're in what central the United States, filming this, and the country is beautiful. And the scenes, a lot of the scenes, especially with the buffalo, is, I mean, you can tell some of it's CGI'd, but a lot of it is like quite convincing. I don't know how. I mean, Costner's direction was great because it made it seem when they were, on the horses chasing all the buffalo down because they were doing a buffalo hunt, um, there were thousands of buffalo around when there probably wasn't. There was only probably a few hundred, or I don't know how many. I would have to look it up if I could find that information. But anyways, they did a great job on the buffalo hunt. It seemed real to me, and even though there's no buffalo around anymore, right? So anyway, so so the film was great, but how was the book? All right, so I saw the movie first, and then I read the book. And when I read the book basically, because so there's this thing, there's a bias. I always mention this in every one of these videos. There's a bias where more than likely, if you've seen the film first and then you've read the book, you will think the film is better than the book. But if you read the book first and then you see the film, you'll usually think the book is better than the film. All right. So um, there was a point for me saying that. Oh yeah. So there's a bit of a bias there, and the reason why there's a bias there is this is the reason. Okay. Um, just in its nature, they're two different medias. All right. So when you read a book, the reason why you're going to like the book more than the movie if you read the book first is because when you read the book, you are imagining all of this. The writer is writing, and you're picturing this. All right. So you'll picture John J. Dunbar as a human being in your imagination. You'll picture Fort Sedgwick as a place in your imagination. All right, the plains, you'll see a buffalo. You'll think what the Indians look like or whatever. The natives. Should I call them Indians anymore, or is that like incorrect? Right. So, um, the First Nations, the native people, or the Sioux or whatever. Right. So you'll picture them in your mind. So you're using your imagination. That's one of the main or biggest attractions for readers, is that they get to engage their imagination. So when you're engaging your imagination, you have these pictures in your head when you read the book. And then when you watch the movie, what you're doing is you're comparing the movie to the pictures that you created with your imagination in your head. So you may think John Dunbar looks a certain way, and then when you see he's Kevin Costner, does he relate to the image that you created, or is he a little bit different? Usually, everything is a bit different when they show it in film, and then what you're doing is you're going, "Oh, I didn't picture that way. I don't think it happened that way. I don't remember it happening that way, or I don't remember." So it goes against what your imagination uses, and so you look at the movie as incorrect or not as good as the book because it doesn't exactly match your imagination. All right. So that's the reason why the bias towards the book. Now, if you see the movie first, what happens is you have a bias towards the movie. And how that happens is when you're watching a movie, you are not engaging your imagination. All right. Your imagination is right there on screen. So you don't have to use your imagination. So what makes a great film is, does it grab you and bring you into the film, and you're experiencing it with the actors and everything. That's what makes a great film. So when you read the book, what you end up doing is you already have all the visuals because you've seen it on the screen. So you're not engaging your imagination, and when you read the book, you start wanting to use your imagination. But what ends up happening is you start picturing everything that's in the book from the movie. So you already know what uh, John J. Dunbar looks like. He looks like Kevin Costner. So you're not engaging your imagination when you're reading the book because you already have the visuals. You don't need to engage your imagination. So it makes the book boring to read because you already had, or whenever it deviates from the film, you're going, hey, that didn't happen in the film. What's going on here, right? And it doesn't match the film or whatever. So it kind of deviates from it. Then you kind of get lost, and then you're a bit confused or whatever, right? So when you watch the film and then you read the book is a bit of a disappointment because the main enjoyment of a book is it engages your imagination, right? And if you've seen the film first, you don't really engage your imagination much when you're reading the book, and therefore the book becomes disappointing. All right. So, but saying that, with Dances with Wolves, because the book and the movie were written by the same guy and basically follow the same plot line and the same scenes and the same action, um, when I read the book, I basically it's like I'm reading a script almost, right? And I quite enjoyed the book. I quite enjoyed. I saw the little differences, but the little differences weren't big enough to not follow the story. And another thing, when you watch the movie, when you read a book, you're waiting to see what happens, but because you watch the movie, you already know what happens in the movie, and so when you're reading the book, you already know what happens, right? So when you're reading the book, um, it may get boring because you already know that this is going to happen, that's going to happen, that is going to happen because you already seen it on the screen. So there is no surprise or anything when you read the book, right? Um, so it takes away that element of surprise or plot movements or whatever because you already know the plot movements, right? So, but because I had watched this movie years ago, it wasn't fresh in my head. I hadn't watched it like a week ago, you know what I mean, or a few days ago. It was years since I watched it. When I read the book, it basically reminded me of the film. And when I was reading the book, I was following along with the book as I was with the film. And because they matched so well, the book was quite enjoyable to read. It wasn't like I was getting confused or anything because I knew what was happening. And the movie had been, you know, I'd watched it long enough ago that when I'm reading the book, I'm remembering as I'm reading it. I'm not remembering as much before I read it, right? So the book is quite good. And if the book is good, right? If the book is good, say hi, my wife. If the book is good, it may not be as good if you've seen the movie first. So it actually has to make an extra jump in order for it to be good if you've already seen the movie that the book is based on, right? Yeah. So it has to be even less susceptible to boringness if you know what's happening, right? Because you've seen the film. And this book does that. It's actually well written, and you can read it after watching the book and still enjoy the book. I read it. you know, in a few days, right? I went back to it and read it. I didn't was like, oh, boring. I don't want to read this anymore, right? So the book was well written, good enough that even if you do see the movie, you'll still enjoy the book, right? So, and there's hardly any difference between the two, and maybe that's the reason why, is that the book is like a memory of the film. If I haven't watched it in a while and I read the book, it's kind of reminding me, oh yeah, I remember that, and I remember that in the movie. I mean, right? So that might have been the enjoyment. But when you see the movie and you read the book, usually because your imagination isn't peaked and you don't use it as much because you've seen the visuals already, you don't have to create them in your head. Um, Books can be disappointing, but this book was not disappointing. All right, so if I was to say which is better, I would still, even though I'm biased because I've seen the film first, right? I would say that this stands up to this pretty damn well. All right, and I would almost say they were equal, but I kind of just like this just a little bit more because it's such a great movie, um, and maybe just because I watched it first. But if you have not seen this movie and you enjoy books more than you do movies, then read the book first. It is a well written book, and it's quite engaging. And when you read it, you follow it, and it has the same thing when you actually see the movie. The movie, you're following it, right? So they're basic, and mostly it's because Michael Blake wrote the book like he was wanting to make a movie of it, so he wrote it like a screenplay almost, and then he wrote the screenplay for the film, right? And so if I was to say just a little bit more the movie over the book, but the book is extremely good. I really enjoyed reading it, and that's saying something if you've seen the film that the book is based on first. It's really difficult sometimes to read a book that a film is based on if you've seen the film first, because the book kind of gets boring because you already know what's going to happen, and your imagination isn't engaged as much, right? So overall, the movie over the book, but just by a thin hair, and it may only be because I saw the movie before I read the book. All right, so that's Dances with Wolves from 1990, the film directed by Kevin Costner, and the book from 1988, written by Michael Blake. All right, and you have a good day. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, leave a thumbs up. Think about subscribing if you so choose. I would enjoy it, and I will talk to you in my next video. And you have a great day, and bye for now.